Bob Scully's World Show is made possible in part by GDI, Commercial Cleaning Services, one provider, one solution. And by Clocks Technologies. Biophotonic lighting manages skin from within.
Hi, this is Bob Scully, and welcome to another edition of the World Show, the Free Markets Series. Chicago, what a great town. But who's taking care of it these days? Who's cleaning it up if it needs to be cleaned up? Not Elliot Ness, John Tillman of the Illinois Policy Institute. And you'll see he's doing a good job of it. Here he is. John Tillman, one of the great attributes and qualities, I think, of the freedom movement is the way it has spread naturally, organically, throughout the U.S. and then from there around the world. And yet, it's odd, but sometimes very efficient work is done by people who have a tight focus geographically. Mm-hmm. They sort of complement each other. Mm-hmm. So the Illinois Policy Institute is obviously focused on Illinois. How did that happen?
Well, in terms of my role, in 2004, I got involved in public policy after selling a business nationally, and I kind of learned how the public policy advocacy work in the very network you're talking about was propagating throughout the country. After 3 years of working nationally, I decided that Illinois was desperate for a little bit of free market thinking and a free market approach. So I wrote a plan to try to build a pro-freedom movement in Illinois, and the Illinois Policy Institute had been around for 5 years, but was very, very tiny with 2 employees. I initially joined its board, eventually became the CEO, and we took off from there.
And we've all heard I checked it with you before the interview because I didn't want to get any hate mail. We've all heard the cliches, I mean, going from the gangster movies in the 20s and the legends about Al Capone, right down to Mayor Daley and the 1960 election.
Right.
There's always been this sort of aura of rough and tumble politics around Illinois. But you got to wonder, you say probably the same thing everywhere or not?
No, I think Illinois is unique. I've worked all over the country, and there's a strange dynamic in Illinois, and most of what you hear in terms of political corruption, what we call the combine, the bipartisan combine that really makes all business decisions from the smallest business decision in a community level all the way up to things being done with Fortune 100 companies. It sort of runs through the political system. You have to come and pay homage to the political class. And I think that makes Illinois different than most places. I could tell you stories about a CEO of a Fortune 500 company who was a friend of mine years ago, went in to see the then governor and, to discuss an issue of public policy, and the governor greeted him with, "What the F do you want?" And our speaker is renowned for his property tax appeals business. And when you go in to see him in the early days, he doesn't do this as much now apparently, but for a long time when you'd sit down to talk to him, he would say, "I noticed your company has a bunch of buildings in Cook County, and my firm has a property tax appeals business. Here's my card. You can call us. We'd like to help you with your property tax appeals. Now, what was it you wanted to talk to me about?" And there's a huge federal corruption probe going on right now, so it is a real problem. I think one of the encouraging things is that Mayor Lightfoot, recently elected, is a traditional progressive in every sense, but she is also an honest reformer, and that has been refreshing.
Well, if it's any consolation to you, as you were describing that about the real estate business, I harked back to the Carroll biography of Lyndon Johnson.
Oh, yes.
So Lyndon Johnson owned TV stations, and it is said that when he was majority leader of the Senate, if you wanted some legislation done, well, you might buy a couple of ads on his Austin TV station.
We would call that synergy now.
But when you attack that, you're attacking vested interests, and I suppose they want to fight back.
They do want to fight back. It's been one of the most difficult and challenging things that have happened. There was a hit piece written in the Chicago Sun-Times on me and the various organizations I'm involved with. That hit piece was actually propagated by people on the right, Republicans who were unhappy with some of the things we were doing on the reform side. But I'd say actually overall right now what's interesting is the right in Illinois is more united than it has ever been. Partly out of desperation, the Democrats have supermajorities in both chambers. And, of course, Governor J.B. Pritzker is the new governor who won in 2018. And we were fighting desperately to ward off what we would consider an excessively progressive and extreme progressive agenda.
And another fascinating thing is it's the intertwining of unions and all these vested interests, but not in an obvious way necessarily. It's just that unions just have the power, the demographic control. The civil service is pretty vast.
Right.
And so if we forget about downstate for a moment, the whole Chicago area is under the sway, can we say that, under the sway of the labor unions?
Oh, I think you can definitely say that. Certainly the public sector unions, which is what we mostly focus on, we think that is a real problem, the level of control and influence they have on the political system and the stranglehold they have. They are the largest funder of elections in the state of Illinois. 71% of their money goes to Democrats and 21% goes to 29% goes to Republicans. And they're very powerful. We just had a teacher strike in Chicago, and the Chicago Teachers Union is an extremely radical and, frankly, a little bit scary union. Theoretically, it's for the kids, but some of these, huge contract increase for them over 5 years. I think it's 15% over that time, at a time when the school system is literally broke and getting brokered by the day. So the unions have outsized influence, and unfortunately, they get a fairly favorable press without real objective reporting about the trauma it's causing in the state. For example, the amount of money we now put into our pension systems is about 27% of our general revenue fund. That's up from about 3 or 4% just 20 years ago. And what's actually happening now is spending by the state for the poor and disadvantaged is actually negative over what it was 20 years ago because the crowding out effect of pension payments to public sector union pension funds.
And the tightness between, I mean, this is not new or proper to Illinois, but still, the tightness between the political machines and the unions is a little bit scary. I was talking about the 1960 election with Mayor Daley. In those days, the unions marched like an army when Mayor Daley spoke or whistled. Has that softened up, or is it still the same thing?
No, that's still the same thing. The biggest shift from 1960 to now, though, is that in 1960 it was primarily private sector unions. And of course, since that time, the percentage of workers that are in private sector unions has plummeted less than 7%. Now, I was guessing in 1960 would have been the 20 or 30% range in Illinois. And the reason private sector union membership has declined is because private sector unions, just like the business, are actually in a competitive market. And if the unions make too bad a deal with their employer, the employer becomes uncompetitive, and then you lose union membership.
Of course.
What's happened now is the shift to public sector unions, and the vast majority of workers at the state and local level are now unionized, either in SEIU, AFSCME, the teachers' unions, and as a result of that, their interest now is to use their leverage as the service providers to the people of the state and withhold those services, in this case in Chicago, by striking, to create leverage to get excessive benefits and pay. Everybody wants to pay our public servants, public service personnel well, but we can't pay them so well that we are really turning public sector workers into millionaire retirees on the backs of the working class and poor.
And indeed, I'm told that in some cases cities, and this applies to the whole nation, some cities are going bankrupt because cops and firefighters are just grossly overpaid.
Yes, this is literally, well, the key thing is it's not the daily or the monthly or annual paycheck, although they are very well paid in Illinois. A state worker in Illinois is the highest paid state worker in the country when you adjust for cost of living, so they are well compensated. But that's not the real problem. The real problem is the level of the pension benefits. So as an example, a teacher in Illinois outside of Chicago who works a 30-year career, over the course of that 30-year career will contribute $133,000 to their retirement. They will get back $2.5 million. Wow. And that is a Ponzi scheme, and that is somewhat typical ratio-wise for the other unions as well, and that's why it's unsustainable.
I've got to join the police force in Illinois or the firefighting force.
Yes. Well, you're correct. What's happening in Illinois right now, we call the municipalities that are struggling, they're the canaries in the coal mine, and they no longer can provide just basic municipal services in many cases, including police and fire, especially in South Cook County, because they're making these very large pension payments.
And I was wondering, as I was reading all this, I was thinking there's something Eastern about the city of Chicago. We're used to this, you know, all these stories, and with older cities, New York, Boston, you know, that have entrenched crime syndicates and so on, and the rest of the country less so, except for Chicago. Chicago has something, you know, like a big northeastern city, and even more. Do you know any historical explanation for that?
I think it's because of the nature of how Chicago was originally settled. You know, one of the famous things people in Chicago like to talk about is its history at one time as the fastest growing city in the world in the 1800s, and it was.
With the World's Fair.
Yes,
at the
exactly.
End of the 19th century.
Exactly. Up until we got to about the 1930s when things began to slow down. And what happened is in Chicago, first of all, Chicago became a mega city relative to the Midwest, much like New York was a mega city. And it took on a lot of the characteristics as people from the East moved into positions of power in the city of Chicago. And government did become one of the pathways to rise in the city, and the corruption that Chicago was famous for that you referred to earlier. All of that sort of created this dynamic in Chicago and in Illinois that is different. When you travel around the country, people don't think of politics as one of the key career choices. You know, if you're in an agricultural area, you go into farming or oil and gas someplace else, and these different kinds of choices. In Chicago, there's the financial community, being a trader in the financial markets, biotech, pharma, manufacturing. But going into politics is one of those choices that many people, especially from certain parts of the city, see as a pathway to prosperity, and it often is.
And somebody watching all that or listening to us would say, okay, then just dilute the power of those unions, go towards right to work and so on. And we're going to talk about a famous case concerning the previous governor, not the present governor.
Right. You
were involved in that.
Yes.
You did win a huge victory.
We did. The Janus versus Ask Me case. Mark Janus was the plaintiff, and I'm chairman of Liberty Justice Center, which is a public interest law firm that represented Mark Janus, and we invited National Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation to join us in that case. And we argued on behalf of 5 million workers in 22 states who were not free to decide whether or not they wanted to pay dues to a union. The way it worked up until this case was if you were a union member and opted out of the union, which you were allowed to do, you still had to pay agency fees. And the unions justified this by saying they were doing collective bargaining work on your behalf, even though you're not a member of the union, so you should pay.
They do that up in Canada, too.
Yes, exactly. And it's somewhat preposterous. They kind of doctor the numbers, and really most of that money is going to politics that you may disagree with as a union member. So Mark Janus was very courageous. We found him and met him and ended up representing him. And he was a member of the Ask Me union and didn't want to be, or he was not a member of the union, but he was paying the agency fees I referred to. And it was something like $700 or $800 a year, which is real money to everyone. And so anyway, we took the case to the Supreme Court. When Justice Scalia died, there was a case ahead of us that was likely going to make the same landmark decision, the Friedrichs case. He was a California teacher, but that case ended in a 4-4 deadlock. And so when the new justice was seated, Gorsuch, and then we had another 5-4 decision on June 27th of 2018. And it is a landmark case in that it basically said this: who's in charge of the relationship that a worker has with their employer, and who's in charge of the relationship with the union? The union thinks the union should be in charge. We think that the worker should be in charge, and that's what we call modernizing labor law and really providing worker freedom. The worker should define their relationship with their own choice, and that's what that case did.
And did it get, as is often right to work cases, especially going back a few decades, but even since then, and in Canada too, for now, it gets hot and heavy. This touches people's livelihood, and a lot of unsavory characters are mixed in there. And so you get anonymous phone calls in your home at night if you're a president of a company or whatever. Did it get that far?
Yes, there's been a lot of that sort of thing going on all over the country. Fortunately for Mark, we were a little worried that would happen with Mark, but Mark was actually treated fairly well. They kept their hands off him, although they did ostracize him at work and didn't treat him very nicely. But there was all kinds of union thuggery going on all over the country where they would try to railroad home health care workers, daycare workers that, as Justice Alito said, were shanghaied into the union. They didn't join the union, but by executive order, they were put into the union, and then part of their stipend from the state would be pulled from their stipend to go to the union coffers. And when people would object, they would have people coming to their doors, knocking at all times of day, haranguing them, harassing them, and that kind of thing did go on. And some of that is going on right now, Bob, in terms of post-Janus litigation and people trying to opt out of the union. The point of the case is that you can opt out of the union. And the unions are erecting all kinds of roadblocks. It would be sort of like if you decided you didn't want to buy your coffee at Starbucks anymore and you want to go across the street to Dunkin' Donuts, they would lock the door and not let you out. That's what's actually happening with these unions in many cases.
And for a think tank, think tanks are not colossal corporations.
No.
And it must be, on the one hand, quite heady to be doing a national case like this and aiming for victory and getting it. But at the same time, it could have set you back quite a bit in resources and money and everything else. And it's a risk to have done that. Why did you want to go national like that?
Well, one of the great privileges of working where I do, and all of us that work in the freedom movement, is we get to live a life of consequence. And I think that is a miracle, that you get to engage on issues that change people's lives for the better. And you get to stop bad things from happening that change people's lives for the worst. And the Janus case in particular, we were actually advised by some veterans. We were sort of a newcomer, a new kid on the block. And we were told by some people that we shouldn't pursue the Janus case because the Friedrichs case was going to solve the problem. And it might confuse the issue to have another case behind it. And we had a serious discussion about that, and I concluded in the end that it made sense to go forward, that more cases coming up the pipeline are better, thus creating pressure for the court to go ahead and make the right decision with Friedrichs. Then, of course, Justice Scalia dies, and we went forward, and we have the Janus decision. So I think that what we're trying to do is, with the most efficient use of donor money, have the biggest impact on improving people's lives and encouraging or helping to create a condition of human flourishing.
And you mentioned some people told you maybe you want to not touch this. When you were doing your outreach and your regular fundraising or whatever, your normal events, as this was unfolding, what kind of reaction were you getting? Approval, disapproval?
In terms of donors and what I'll call the engaged activist community, we were getting nothing but wonderful approval. It was very rewarding, and people were very, very excited about it because everybody knew that this case in particular was going to be transformational, and it has been. I forget the numbers now nationally, but in Illinois alone, 20,000 people have opted out of the union, and I think that's an amazing thing that these people get to express their. Remember what the core issue is. This is about your free speech rights and your right to associate. Prior to this ruling, you were forced to have speech. You were compelled to do speech that you didn't want to by paying for it.
A closed shop.
Yeah, exactly. A closed shop. You had no choice. You were in the you were paying money to the union with these agency fees. They would spend it on ideas you disagreed with. That's, as Justice Alito said, compelled speech. That is every bit as much a violation of the principles of free speech. And you're being forced to associate with a group you may choose not to. We would never think of forcing people generally to associate outside of this, but somehow in a union it's okay. So it's been very exciting to see that transformation having that kind of impact on people's lives.
And since you've persevered, you mentioned, some of this still goes on, but since you've persevered, is it reasonable to assume at some point you'll see the top of the mountain? In other words, these people will make peace with you, maybe grudgingly, but you guys will all have lunch somewhere. I mean, I'd be silly.
I might get a food tester if we're having lunch. I don't think we're too close to that right now. I think it's been really interesting. The unions, it's been very interesting to me, the union reaction to this. And I'm going to give a general answer. There have been some exceptions. But one of the things I said the day the decision came down is we'll learn a lot about the unions in terms of how they react to this. Because what happens in the normal world when something like this happens, and your customers, which are their members or potential members, give you some feedback that they're not happy. What a normal service provider does, well, how can I provide better services? How can I win them over? How can I earn their money by giving them good services? Or instead, will the unions create false roadblocks, potholes, and barriers to the members exercising their rights? And unfortunately, in most cases, all over the country, the unions are creating roadblocks and barriers and preventing people from opting out easily. So there's a whole nother series of litigation that is going on to help enforce the Janus decision. And I'm just disappointed by the unions. Earn it like everybody else does. How about a little persuasion instead of coercion?
Well, actually, if they were strategic, I don't know if this is doable, but they could just sort of whip around and give you some of what you want without objecting or resisting, and you'd be sort of dumbfounded, and they would gain a step. I mean, in the normal give and take of any negotiation, that has not happened.
That has happened in some isolated places and in some local unions around the country. There has been a very positive reaction and what I would consider a constructive reaction, but the vast majority of them are fighting tooth and nail. Because they've had it really easy. They've had the government have a law that allowed them to take people's money whether they wanted to give them money or not. And they're relearning how to try to get that money voluntarily, and so they're erecting these barriers, unfortunately.
And they're not, it's like loosening your grip. They don't want to loosen their grip. It's their livelihood.
It's very much, I think, why new entrants into a market space are the disruptors. The legacy players are almost never the disruptors because they can't imagine a world different than what they've come up with. And these unions have had it their way for a very long time, and they can't just pivot and suddenly learn a new way of doing things. I think one of the things we'll see come in the next 10 to 20 years is there'll be new competitive entrants trying to provide benefits to union members, or government workers, I should say, who may not be union members. And we'll see some competition in the marketplace as some disruptors come in and offer alternatives to the union membership.
And in addition to often the closed shop is the result of a union monopoly, does Illinois law allow competitive unions to each other?
Not currently. So once a union has the right to collectively bargain for a group or an entity, they have a monopoly right to that. And that is one of the next areas, I think, of litigation and opportunity. It's a whole subject matter about government monopolies, but I think it's an area of great interest in terms of public interest law, is that we should outlaw and declare unconstitutional the very concept of a government monopoly, not just in terms of collective bargaining, but in all services. The water company, the electric company, there's places all over the country where governments, local governments in particular, own the local water company or the local electric company, and they will literally pass laws to prevent competition from coming in while they're giving poor services to their community.
And in the case of the unions, at least up in Canada, what will happen occasionally is they sort of, in a sly way, we can say that, go around and sign enough people to reach the minimum.
Yes.
And then they turn, and sometimes people don't even realize it, neither the workers nor the company. They just whip around and bingo, they have the legal right to represent, and you can't take it away.
This is happening all over the country right now, where they're tricking people into signing the union card all the time. And I find that really appalling, and we're fighting that every step of the way. One of the things our litigation center, Liberty Justice Center, is working on is something we call Janus Rights. You are maybe familiar with the American version of Miranda rights, where if you're arrested, you're read your rights, and so you are fully informed as you go through the process. We believe every government worker, when they come in, should be read their Janus rights, so they're fully informed of what they can do or not do. They can join the union if they want, they can not join the union if they want, and the union representative, when they come in to make their pitch, can't use coercion. That we think that is part of what the Janus Rights protocols should be, and we're fighting to make that happen.
And in Canada, again, another example that we've seen recently, and this time it went the other way. A lot of, think tanks and organizations like yours took the budgets of these unions, the big ones, and analyzed them, and then said, did you know that, $300 million this year went to this union, and what did they do with it? And just the figure 300 million, people said, what? Do you do some of that?
We do some of that, and we particularly like to disclose and publicize the salaries of the union leaders as compared to the average income of a union member, and that usually goes over not so well.
It's a good thing you're not dealing with the old gang.
Yes,
Jimmy Hoffa and
yes, we know what happened to him.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, we sort of know what happened to him.
Well, on that note, by the way, we have a nice occasion to end maybe on something positive, because it's important not to just give the negative. Can you tell us what the unions have done right? How they help? Nobody's calling for their abolition, right?
No, I think one of the things I always like to emphasize, this is not a union member's fault. We're not blaming union members, rank and file members. We just think every single union member should have a choice, join or not join. And we also think that there should be regular re-elections and re-voting by union members. Some of these union members are in the union and there hasn't been a vote in decades.
Yeah, of course.
But I think one of the things the unions have done well, and I think one of the things we lose sight of sometimes, is that unionization in America, at least, which I'm more familiar with, in the 20s and 30s, was absolutely essential to creating the middle class. There was definitely an inequality of power between those who employed people and those who were working. And the union movement really created an incredible middle class, and I really believe that. I think it was very nice. But what ended up happening is the power was all with the business owner, and now it had shifted all the way, now the power is with the union.
Yeah, that's
and so when I say we got to modernize labor law, what I mean by that is we need to shift the power back to the worker. Let the worker be empowered to choose and define their relationship. And if we do that, then there's no problem having unions. They'll have to compete for that worker's loyalty just like everybody else does.
And they may get it.
And they may get it.
And in the meantime, we've just given them a nice clip for their next recruitment campaign, courtesy of our conversation.
I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, we've been fair. So thank you so much, and long life to you and to the Illinois Institute.
Thanks for having me on, Bob. I appreciate it.
John Tillman, and now here's someone else coming up on the World Show.
Well, at Dynasert, we have a very unique electrolysis system. I mean, what it is actually an on-demand hydrogen unit that goes on diesel engines. We produce pure hydrogen and pure oxygen just from distilled water, and we introduce it to the internal combustion engine through the intake. And what we are is we're a catalyst. Like we improve the fuel economy, we lower the emissions very significantly, but it's all done right at the burn. It's we're not a fuel. People sometimes get confused, with the introduction of hydrogen, thinking we're a fuel. We are not a fuel. It's something that's been proven over 50 years is trace amounts of hydrogen to an internal combustion engine enhances the burn. And that's exactly what we do. The problem was, or the challenge has always been, there is literally a sweet spot. You've got to have just that right mixture. Otherwise you get negative results. So we've spent 15 years and over $50 million developing this product. And so we have now got it where it is fully computerized. It literally learns from the engine. So it's taking information from the engine on a continual basis to our smart ECU, which is a computerized system, to determine the proper flow rate of gases to optimize the burn. Actually, the U.S. Department of Energy said we've got the holy grail. They said that we have found a way to produce more hydrogen and oxygen through less power than anything they'd have ever seen before. But the electrolysis is really not the magic. It is the computerization of it, and that was very sophisticated.
John Tillman, CEO of the Illinois Policy Institute, was our guest this week on the Free Markets series of The World Show. I'm Bob Scully. Have a great week. Thanks.
Bob Scully's World Show was made possible in part by GDI, Commercial Cleaning Services, one provider, one solution. And by Clocks Technologies, Biophotonic Lighting, manages skin from within.